Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's event, Carole Lombard, Hollywood Spirit, Screwball Queen. I'm really pleased to be able to introduce Lucy Bolton, who's an expert in the subject. She's, in fact, recently just done a DVD extra for the new DVD of 20th Century, which sounds like it's going to be something really special. She's also co-edited Last Screen Stars, Images That Fade and Personas That Endure. So hopefully we'll find out that Carole Lombard is one of the ones who's lasted. Just a little bit of housekeeping. If you look on the top right hand of your screen, you'll see a little chat bub, and that's where you can post questions. Lucy's going to be talking for about 35-40 minutes, and then hopefully we'll have plenty of time to have a discussion afterwards. So welcome, Lucy.
Thank you very much, Nikki. I hope everyone can hear me okay, and I believe that you can see me in a tiny little square on the right-hand side of your screen. So it's a great pleasure to be able to give this talk about Carole Lombard tonight. In fact, the last public event I did before lockdown was to speak about Lombard at the BFI last January. It's part of their season, The Brightest Star. I hope some of you got to see some of those films. And the fact that it was called The Brightest Star is just, it just hints at the magnitude of her stardom, particularly in the late 30s, a period when she was the highest paid star in Hollywood. But her stardom and her star image are actually quite complex. And so I want to do three things in this talk. Firstly, I want to give a little bit of biographical information. Now, I'm sure that there are people here who know a lot about her biography, but I'm equally sure that there are a lot of people who don't know anything about it. So I certainly can't cover it all, but I will give a little bit of information about how she started out and how she got to Hollywood and how she got to, this is the second thing I want to talk about, how she ended up at Nothing Sacred, which is in a way the very peak of her Screwball career. And to talk about how she got to 1937, which is when Nothing Sacred was made and she was nominated for an Oscar. It was a very significant year for Lombard. And so that's the year that I'm going to lead us up to. And then going to focus on some analysis of her star persona. Carole Lombard, the star, some consideration of the elements of her star persona. Star personas are made up of various elements and ideas and concepts, and some thoughts about her legacy and how she has endured across the decades. And that's, I'd love to hear from you then about your thoughts about Lombard, what you love about her, why you're here, what films you like, and hopefully we can have a conversation about her later. I'm going to start, however, somewhere a little bit perhaps unexpected, with Tilda Swinton. This is an interview with Tilda Swinton in last month's Vogue, British Vogue. She's asked, in lockdown, did you feel drawn to nostalgia? And Swinton replies, my very first response, which is maybe similar to many people's, was a sort of back to basics comfort, meaning going back to my great favourites like Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger, Hitchcock, Carole Lombard. I loved reading this and seeing Lombard as not only as one of Tilda's favourites, but also that she ranks Lombard alongside Hitchcock and Powell and Pressburger, such major industrial figures. We'll mention Hitchcock again towards the end of the talk, but first some biographical background. Unlike many other star stories that I'm sure we're all familiar with, Lombard's is no rags to riches story. She was born Jane Alice Peters into a wealthy family in Fort Wayne, Indiana, 1908. She had two elder brothers who she adored. Her parents separated in 1914 and her mother moved with the children to the West Coast, to Los Angeles. In the preceding couple of years, America's film industry had relocated from the East Coast to become a regulated West Coast industry. So little Jane Alice therefore grew up surrounded by the movie industry, and she was certainly brought up with Hollywood and the movies all around her and was interested in a career in the movies from a young age. She was in fact spotted when she was 12, either playing baseball on the streets or boxing with her brothers. There are accounts of both, but she was certainly seen at play, physical play, by movie director Alan Dwan, who saw her basically knocking the socks off all the other kids that she was playing with, being really tough and physical and strong and combative. She was effervescent and energetic, and it was this energy that Dwan wanted for his film Perfect Crime. The film didn't actually go anywhere, but Jane had enjoyed it very much, and she decided that she wanted to work in the movies. She grew up a lot over the next few years, becoming a competitive, athletic, vivacious teenager. She won the school beauty contest, Queen of the May. In 1924, she was spotted by a movie scout in the May Day Carnival, and in 1925 was tested by Charlie Chaplin for the Gold Rush. She didn't get that part, we can maybe talk about that a bit later, but the test was spotted by Vitagraph, who suggested that she change her name from Jane Alice Peters to Carole. There were a few other sort of false starts, but eventually, with the help of Luella Parsons, the famous Hollywood gossip queen, who her mother, Carole's mother, did court, young Carole Peters was signed by 20th Century Fox for a 1-year contract. And she then changed her name to Lombard after a family friend, and kept practicing her autograph with a flamboyant L. She rather liked her new name, Carole Lombard. She embraced it. Now, she had a blast during these months at Fox, doing bit parts in various films, but also becoming brilliant at the Charleston. And she won the Charleston contest at the Coconut Grove, reigned supreme as the Charleston Queen, until she was challenged by another young starlet from MGM, one Lucille who was soon to be renamed as Joan Crawford. So I love this idea that Lombard and Crawford were kind of competitive Charleston queens at the Coconut Grove when they were very young. But Carole was beginning to build her career now, building her experience, sorting out her look, shaping her look, meeting big players, including John Barrymore, but was then involved in a car accident with a young boyfriend, which she was lucky to survive. And her face was basically slashed open by the windscreen falling on her face and cutting her face open. Her mother ensured that she received pioneering plastic surgery, but the wound was bad. And although she was left with only a relatively small scar on her cheek, that wasn't known when she was so badly cut up. And Fox cancelled her contract because they weren't going to invest in someone whose face had to be magnified so huge on the cinema screen, and whose beauty was so integral to their success. So Fox cancelled her contract, and you can see the slight scars on her left cheek. In the book about Face, which is a fabulous book, The Life and Times of Dottie Pondell, the makeup artist, Pondell describes how she would fill up, in later years, she would fill up the scar before applying the makeup. So Lombard learned to deal with this scar, but at this stage it seemed like it might end her career. So by the age of 18, she'd already had a fairly lengthy encounter with the movie business, been contracted, been dropped, had this accident. But following her recovery from her accident, she became one of Max Sennett's bathing beauties, taking part in, this is one of my favourite ones, this the Campus Vamp, this is called, which is very, she's wonderful in this. But yes, she became one of Max Sennett girls, the bathing beauties, taking part in kind of slapstick, crazy films, mainly in bathing costumes. She made over 20, or about 20 in 2 years, 1927, 1928. And this was a tremendous training ground for her in physical unself-consciousness, which was probably particularly important, having had the scar that she had, and in physical comedy. So it was a tremendous training ground for her. That work with Sennett led to some further parts and a meeting with Joseph P. Kennedy, who spotted Carole's leading lady potential, provided she lose some weight. She apparently said to him, well, you're not so skinny yourself either. So she was always quite lippy and always quite tough. But on her 20th birthday, 1928, she became a feature player under contract to Pathé. Now, these years, of course, saw the coming of sound. If we think about when this is happening, there were a hugely vibrant era for star players. MGM, there was John Gilbert, for example, who was a casualty of the talkies, but also Greta Garbo, Norma Shearer, Joan Crawford, who all became far bigger stars as a result of the talkies. And Lombard's voice was a lovely surprise to people. It turned out she had this mellifluous, expressive voice, so she was well placed at this time. So she continued to work at Pathé, but did not find her stride, really, despite trying several genres. But she then winded up getting a contract, a 7-year contract with Paramount in 1930, which was really the kind of bee's knees of the places to be. Gloria Swanson and Pola Negri were there. Clara Bow had been there. And by now, Carole was really getting quite experienced in the movie business. She was still very young. She hadn't really made a huge impact yet. She hadn't stamped her individuality on Hollywood yet. Paramount certainly spotted her talents. They also accidentally added an E to her name, Carole with an E. So she decided to keep that, became Carole Lombard from then on. But they still failed to find work that showed her in her best light or in an original light. She became what they called the Orchid Lady, which was essentially a publicity campaign where she was photographed many times and filmed with orchids around her and sort of designed to maximize her elegance, her ethereal beauty, including, and she also appeared in this film, No More Orchids. And some other roles followed, things like Fast and Loose, and It Pays to Advertise. And these, of course, were all pre-code movies, so they were quite risque as well. Howard Hawks said that she was kind of a clothes horse at Paramount, and I think that's right. She considered that was the case. She looked wonderful in beautiful outfits, but she wasn't really developing a strong on-screen persona. She met William Powell on the set of Man of the World and fell in love with him in 1931, and they got married. And around this time, she began to kind of refine her look a bit as well. I suppose she's maturing, so her hair got slightly longer and softer. The emphasis shifted slightly more to her cheekbones from her eyes that she'd had when she was younger. And she, by the time the marriage with Powell dissolved, it didn't last very long, only a couple of years. She had moved on, she had matured, and her career started to develop after the marriage ended. Coincidentally, she had also worked with Clark Gable during the years of the marriage to William Powell. They'd made the film No Man of Her Own, in which she plays a sexy librarian in 1932. She wasn't that impressed with Clark Gable at that stage, and she was devoted and in love with William Powell, so nothing happened between them. But when the marriage was over, she had grown and developed, and she went on to make to be in some more high-profile roles, such as she made Bolero, 2 films in 1934, Bolero with George Raft, which is fabulously risque, if not rude, and there are some great clips of the dance sequences from that on YouTube. I've actually made a list of references, books and clips for you for tonight that you'll be sent with the feedback questionnaire, because I've decided not to show film clips because they're so mediated by the technology that they don't seem to work very well. They're jerky and they don't always work, and I didn't want to waste anyone's time. So do please have a look at these links and follow it up and watch the quite amazing dance sequence between with George Raft and Carole Lombard on YouTube. She also made We're Not Dressing with Bing Crosby, which is a kind of desert island. It's a version of the Admiral Crichton, really, a sort of posh people marooned on a desert island with a butler, and they realise they need him more than they thought. But both these films sort of cemented her more sophisticated reputation, and they're very interesting films, both of them, for different reasons. We're Not Dressing was quite a hoot off screen, apparently, she developed quite a wild friendship with Bing Crosby, even though the film itself was not particularly exciting for her. But after these, then we arrive at 20th Century. Now, this is a fabulous film. I'm sure that many of you have seen it. Howard Hawks, who was Lombard's second cousin, in fact, had negotiated the rights to produce and direct the film version of the popular play 20th Century by Ben Hecht and Charles MacArthur for Columbia Studios. So this was, Lombard was loaned out to Columbia for the making of this film. Hawks and Barrymore, John Barrymore, really wanted Lombard for this part. And Lombard was really excited by it because she sensed that it could make her a leading player, like that could really sort of launch her. And Paramount were happy to lend her for this potentially star-making role because they had singularly failed to ignite her into a star, actually. Howard Hawks didn't think she was a great actress. That's not why he wanted her. But he had seen her off-screen at parties. She was a great party girl. And he thought she was a marvellous, he describes her as a marvellous gal, crazy as a bedbug, which I think is quite a brilliant expression. And he said he thought if she could just be herself, she'd be great for this part. Well, the thought of working with John Barrymore did scare her, frankly. She had a role lined up with him before she had her car accident, but now she was going to work with him. She was quite terrified. They did become great friends, and Barrymore rated her very highly. He actually said she was the most talented actress that he'd ever worked with. But it didn't start off well. On the first day, Barrymore and Hawks were both very unimpressed with Carole. They thought she was very stiff and too sort of drama schooly and trying too hard. Barrymore even kind of held his nose as if, you know, oh, she stinks, she's got to go. So Hawks took her for a walk around the block and said to her, you know, if someone spoke to you like this in real life, if someone was as rude to you as Barrymore's character Oscar Jaffe is to you in the film, what would you do? She's like, I'd kick him. I'd go mad. So Hawks said to her, well, do that. Be that free. Be that limber. Go mad. Let yourself go. And Barrymore in turn took her aside and said, just be yourself. Stop trying so hard. So she was effectively let loose by these two, by Barrymore and Hawks. And this led to a far more kind of frenetic, pacey Lombard. And it essentially saw the creation of the Lombard Screwball persona. There was a very dynamic, sort of feisty relationship between the two of them. It was quite frenetic, dialogue delivered really rapid fire. Physicality. Lombard was petite but incredibly forceful on screen. She told reporter George Madden that Barrymore had taught her more in the 6 weeks that it took to make the picture than she had learnt in the 5 years previously. She added, I'll never forget how swell I'd feel to hear that booming laugh of his. It was the most subtle flattery. In the world, I worked like a dog to earn those laughs, John Barrymore's. So his approbation really meant a lot to her. She is fast, lively, kinetic and energetic and physically adept, kind of leaping around the set. It's a wonderful role in 20th Century. She moves from lingerie model Mildred Plotka to film star, to star of the stage Lily Garland. It is a priceless part, and I think that Mildred Plotka is one of Carole Lombard's fantastic on-screen names. We'll come to some others later. So it's unsurprising, given their advice, Hawks' advice and Barrymore's, that Lombard appears very natural in this film. And this becomes a trademark of her performances from now on. There's a naturalness and a lack of artifice to her posture, her movement, her facial expressions, and her manner in general. She becomes much looser. Famous Hollywood costume designer Edith Head said of Carole that she wasn't actressy. She said her clothes always looked as if they belonged on her. That's quite a statement as well, because Lombard really, really wears dresses beautifully. She wears costumes beautifully. So what happens in 20th century is we see the launch of the Lombard screwball persona that finally enables her to forge this distinctive persona, this distinctive career in films that make the most of her talents and her personality. Her personality has been let loose to come through. But this style of performance we see again and again from now on, including in some of the greats like My Man Godfrey, Hands Across the Table, Mr. and Mrs. Smith. But the film also really marks the beginning of the screwball genre. It's the same year as It Happens One Night, 1934, the part in which Lombard turned down in order to do Bolero with George Raft. So in these subversive films, these screwball films, questions of class, masculinity, sexuality and marriage are all fair game. They're really quite subversive, challenging films, and sent up, you know, pilloried, really laughed at, even if some of the endings are actually quite conventional. 20th century is considered by many critics to be the definitive screwball film, really. It sets the benchmark. And it also was Howard Hawks' first screwball film. And it also marks the end, really, of John Barrymore's career as a leading man. He's fantastic in it. He gives a terrifically over-the-top performance as the larger-than-life Oscar Jaffe. It is one of his finest performances, but his well-known struggles with alcohol dominated his life now, and increasingly his work. And he didn't really produce anything as strong, anywhere near as strong again. He does appear in True Confession, again with Lombard in 1937, and does brilliantly in that actually, but that was a part she really lobbied for him to have. A bit more about her devotion to her friends later. So in 1935, Lombard made Hands Across the Table, her first with Fred McMurray, several collaborations, where she plays a manicurist. So I love this image because it's focused on her fabulous nails. And then she also made Rumba with George Raft, another dance-based film, and also Love Before Breakfast, which is a strange, in 1936, as she moves on, she makes Love Before Breakfast, for which she is a great part of the film, seen with a big black eye, and that's even on the poster for the film. So it indicates how sort of physical violence and fighting and slapstick was such a big part of the screwball genre, which can seem quite strange to us these days, but when you watch it, there is actually quite a lot of physical violence in these films. Then she appeared in one of my favourites, The Princess Comes Across, as a kind of, she does an impersonation of Greta Garbo basically for the whole film, which is incredibly hilarious, and she's very, very good at the sort of stature and the delivery of these lines as a kind of pretend Garbo. And then she makes My Man Godfrey. This is all 1936, and My Man Godfrey is a smash hit. I have students, like undergraduate students, 18, 19, 20-year-olds who love My Man Godfrey. Now, she made this with her ex-husband, William Powell, who had wanted her to have the role. He suggested that she'd be perfect for it. And this was another loan out from Paramount. This was with Universal. Carole is wildly zany in this film as another fantastic name, Irene Bullock. She plays the rich New York girl who thinks she's rescued what they call in the film a forgotten man, as in a homeless man, and appoints herself as his sponsor. Carole was Oscar nominated for this film, and got some of the best reviews of her career. She's wildly wonderful in it. She plays rich and spoiled, yes, but she's also very childlike and kind of bemused by the world around her, and kind at heart, which is what the butler Godfrey spies in her, and what sets her apart from the rest of her family and her more kind of scheming, hard-hearted sister. So this is 1936. We begin 1937. It's a pivotal year for Lombard. She's begun a relationship with Clark Gable. into her private life has entered a very important phase for her. She also negotiates a fantastic financial deal with Paramount through her famously tough agent, Myron Selznick. And she makes 3 more films this year. 2 with Fred MacMurray, Swing High and Swing Low, and True Confession. And she gives one of the finest performances of her career in Nothing Sacred. Nothing Sacred is a biting satire. I remember seeing it as a child and thinking, this isn't funny. Why is this considered a comedy? And but now I can see what a kind of excoriating satire it is about the hypocrisy of journalism and the sort of culture's love of a sentimental sob story. Carole plays, another fantastic name, Hazel Flagg, with 2 G's, who at the beginning of the film has been diagnosed with radium poisoning and is told she is going to die. And she's then told, pretty swiftly, that she has been misdiagnosed and is going to live. But this correction does not come before newspaperman, played by Frederick March, makes his way to Hazel's hometown to tell her he wants to whisk her to New York and make her dreams come true, show her that a wonderful time on the town before it's too late. March needs the scoop that the journalist has been in trouble with his paper, and he spots this as a great scoop. And so he takes her to New York, and she is fated with confetti, music and tears wherever she's taken. Her name is in lights. She's greeted with her name in the sky, trailed by an aeroplane as she arrives in New York. But she receives it all. She receives all of this, not adulation so much, but public sympathy and this high platform, knowing in fact that she is in perfect health. The movie is in Technicolor, so it's our one chance to see Carole Lombard in a colour film, and the palette of colours is just gorgeous. Creamy, peachy, and this divine grey, silvery blue. The film really capitalises on Carole's physicality. I'll just go back to the earlier slide. She's very physically hilarious in it. She's a real sort of slapstick comedian. But she's particularly funny in 2 scenes, I think. Several, but one where she gets drunk at the party and faints, and her doctor's very angry with her. He says, "Fancy getting drunk in front of all these people, Hazel," which is very amusing. Then also there's a scene known as the Big Fight, which is the clip I did want to show you tonight, but it was too sort of stuttery, it didn't work. It's one of the film's most famous scenes. Again, it's on YouTube, and I've put a link to that scene in the flyer that's going to come out with the feedback form. It is one of the film's most famous scenes. We may balk a little at the violence again. Frederick March hits and hits and hits her. But she adored this scene, and she took boxing lessons to up her game so that she could swing punches convincingly. And it's very much a part of the comedy of the film. There's also a very funny sequence that always looks improvised to me, where Hazel is rescued ostensibly by a firefighter who gives her his coat, and she holds out her hand to take his hat as well and puts his hat on, and looks very funny in the hat. I'm pretty sure that I don't know, it always looks improvised to me. So Carole is now, on the back of Nothing Sacred, crowned Queen of Screwball. There is no one else who can touch her. 1937, she makes more money in 1937 than any other actor in Hollywood. It really is the zenith of her Screwball reign. So following this amazing run of films and successful popular performances, popular with audiences and critics now, since 20th century, her image with critics really had an overhaul. They suddenly saw what she had to offer and how great she was at what she could do. So following this amazing run of films and successful performances, she was on the cover of Life magazine in October 1938. And not just on the cover, with a big article on the inside. entitled "A Loud Cheer for the Screwball Girl." I'm going to read you a couple of quotes from this article. The writer says, "The craze for screwball comedies was launched by Carole Lombard in 1934 with a picture called 20th Century. It gathered momentum when she appeared in My Man Godfrey 2 years later. Last winter, Carole Lombard was the star of both the season's top screwball comedies, Nothing Sacred and True Confession. As top specialist in Hollywood's top speciality, Carole Lombard's claim to the title of world champion attractive screwball is not open to question. It is proved by the fact that she gets $150,000 per picture, which is top pay for any kind of star, that her total income last year was roughly $500,000, and that she now ranks in a class with Mary Pickford, Rudolph Valentino, Jean Harlow, Shirley Temple, and Mickey Mouse." That's quite a gang of peers. The article goes on. "Salient quality of Carole Lombard is superfluity," I'm not sure if it's superfluity or superfluity, but superfluity of nervous energy. "She gets up too early, plays tennis too hard, wastes time and feeling on trifles and drinks Coca-Cola the way Samuel Johnson used to drink tea. She's a scribbler on telephone pads, inhibited nail biter, toe scuffler, pillow grabber, head and elbow scratcher, and chain cigarette smoker. When Carole Lombard talks, her conversation, often brilliant, is punctuated by screeches, laughs, growls, gesticulations, and the expletives of a sailor's parrot." What a fantastic description that is of her. And I think it really conjures up the energy and speed and liveliness that she exudes, seemingly off screen as well as on. Her passion for Coca-Cola is widely written about, actually. She apparently drank it all the time. So this description of her leads me on to consider her more broadly, to analyse Lombard the star, not just her acting career and how she got to where she got to at this stage, 1937, but also what she stands for, what her image is made up of. Her beauty forms a major part of the commentary, of all the commentary on her. I'll just go back to that previous slide. You can see her here as a child acting as a waitress at a gala in Los Angeles, and all these images of her on the right show her kinetic face, her movement, and her personality. But she's one of those stars for whom beauty, almost like lifelong beauty, is a major part of their story. Sort of like Vivian Leigh or Elizabeth Taylor. It's not the case with all stars, but she is described as being a beautiful person, beautiful child, teenager, young woman. But also, so is her personality, a major part of what people say about her. As I say, liveliness, naturalness, bawdiness. She has the nickname the Profane Angel because her language is so ribald, and generally being a huge character. I've consulted a few magazines from the 1930s. That's what eBay's for, clearly, to see how she was described at the time. And I've discovered some absolute gems to share with you. So in Picture Goer from 1937, this is May 1937, in an article entitled "How to Sell Your Personality" by Carole Lombard. It's in her it's written in the first person. She states, "I'm more convinced than ever that each successful player has certain definite features to sell, has certain features which make certain prospective buyers purchase it." To a star studies scholar, that's very interesting because it's showing her canny awareness of her own value and the value of individuals, at a very early stage. But she also says there is constant change with a star. She talks about the changes that Crawford's gone through, the changes that she's gone through, albeit very subtle. She reflects upon the changes in herself from the Max Sennett Bathing Beauty days 10 years earlier. She talks about change in her hair and makeup and things, and says it wouldn't be a stretch to say you are now hearing from the Carole Lombard of 1937. So again, it's very interesting because it shows she's got this awareness of the image that needs to grow and change and shift and keep people interested. She also speaks about fashion here, which I think is very important. She says that all women have a relationship to fashion, and establishing a relationship with fashion is important for a star's career. She considers Travis Banton, who's the Paramount stylist, to be her best friend, she says, by conceiving costumes that have kept her in the eyes of the women of the world. She's very frank about the changes in her hair and makeup, and says how important it is for the average woman too to do this. She refers to how over the last few years she has, in her own words, she says, mentally unlimbered, meaning she's become less stiff, learning to be herself. And she says that under her new contract, which is the one post the her 7-year one coming to an end, she says that under her new contract she has the full authority in picking the stories, so I can direct myself away from deadly sameness in roles, she says. She then says, which is pretty sad and poignant, no woman can play romantic parts in pictures after reaching the age of 35. And of course, tragically, she never did reach 35. She died in a plane crash on the way home from selling war bonds in early 1942, and she was just 33. So that's quite a kind of poignant line to read. But she says in this article that she's learnt that in Hollywood, success is a result of being natural, which I think is quite striking compared to what you might associate with someone like Joan Crawford, for example, who often seems to be the very antithesis of natural. Her star image was a result of such dedication and such hard work to her body, her face, and everything about her. Lombard says she loves motion pictures, and she says, I'd never want to do anything else. I like the people, the work, the play, everything about them. So she's conveying there really how immersed she is in Hollywood and motion pictures, and how she just loves every part of it. She was known for being very egalitarian on sets, being friends with everybody, bringing cakes for everybody, for the lighting crew, for the makeup artists. She was just friends with everyone. She didn't always have a trailer because she liked to hang out on the set with the crew rather than be cloistered away. So she was a very friendly, open person. Next picture girl I got hold of, she's on the cover and on the inside as well. This is from January 1939, Hollywood's gay glamour girl #1. It's a slight change to glamour girl from Screwball Queen. This article describes her as one of the most completely democratic persons in all of Hollywood. So that picks up on what I was just saying about her being friendly with everybody. And also describes her as restless, high-strung, unrestrained, and completely vital. She sounds quite a ball of fire, really. But then they also point out in this article she is serious-minded and businesslike. Cecil B. DeMille is quoted as saying of her, Miss Lombard is as wise as she is witty. They cite again that in 1937 she earned more than any other screen star. She was known for this, but she was also known for saying that she was perfectly happy to pay her taxes because she was grateful for all that the country had done for her and for other citizens, and considered the price not too high at all. So I think that got her a letter from the White House saying, thank you very much for your support. She said that, yes, she earned a lot, but she was very happy to pay her taxes as well. She loved animals. She was always surrounded by animals, particularly dogs. And here is a picture of her with her Pekingese dog, called Pecky or Peak, but known also by Carole as Pushface the Killer, which I think is quite brilliant. It doesn't look much like a killer, but so she loved her dogs. But at this time, she also had, which is described in the article, 2 dachshunds, a cocker spaniel, lots of birds in her garden, including bantam roosters, doves, ducks, goldfish, and a cat called Josephine. The article talks also about her friendships, her relationships with other stars, and she describes how she was great friends with Marlene Dietrich and Claudette Colbert, how she stayed great friends with William Powell, her first husband. It seems she was a really devoted friend, sympathetic and helpful to those in trouble, and always keen to help people out, financially, yes, and also personally through support, people such as William Haynes, John Barrymore, Gary Cooper. She really stood by her friends and came through for them when they were in trouble. She's not on the cover of this one, Film Weekly 1939, Hollywood's Goofiest Girl Grows Up. She's 30 here, and she says the article describes her as just beginning to achieve those things that she dreamt of in her youth. She's forsaking comedy and emerging as a serious dramatic actress. So we've got a change in how she's being described here. She says that she has passed through the depths of despair, built up her reputation for clowning as a consequence of that. The article describes her as clowning her way to the heights of stardom. I think the depths of despair that they refer to there will be presumably the accident that she had when she was young, but also the loss of her great love, Russ Columbo, the singer who died in a tragic accident. And she was devastated by his loss, which was again before she met Gable, between Powell and Gable. She described Russ Columbo as the love of her life many times. The article goes on to say, but here and there in her later pictures, so meaning now, whenever a dramatic situation occurred, Carole proved herself to be more than a match for it. And the author, happily here, puts this partly down to Gable. They'd married in March 1939, and this is July 1939. The article goes on to say, after her performance in Nothing Sacred, it became apparent to everyone with half an eye that to keep Carole in crazy comedy would be a wicked waste of talent. So Carole is now embarking on the biggest dramatic role of her career, which appears to be a film called Memory of Love. I said we'd return to Alfred Hitchcock, and here he is. Alfred Hitchcock said of her, I liked her very much. She had a bawdy sense of humour and used the language that men use with each other. I'd never heard a woman speak that way. She was a forceful personality, stronger, I felt, than Gable. I think that's very interesting. When Hitchcock moved out to Hollywood, Lombard and Gable were just moving out to their ranch. They just got married, and Hitchcock rented Lombard's house from her for a while. They became very good friends. And I think it's interesting that Hitchcock says he found her to be stronger than Gable. I don't know much about Gable, but I think her strength of personality and strength of character really comes through in everything that you read about her. He then says, I made the picture with her because it wasn't easy to say no to her. He's talking about Mr. and Mrs. Smith, which they made in 1941. Bit of an often seen as an aberrant film for Hitchcock. It's his only kind of screwball comedy. There are Hitchcock touches in it, clearly. It's a Lombard vehicle. She's amazing in it. And she directed Hitchcock's cameo in the film. There's footage of that on YouTube as well, which is wonderful to see. He didn't really plan to use her take, he said, in the film, but it turned out to be really good. And he said she might have become a director one day. She had the personality for it. So she was de facto producer on Mr. and Mrs. Smith, having got it made, having got Hitchcock to direct it, and then having directed his cameo. So she's becoming a real movie mover and shaker, actually, movie industry mover and shaker. So I would say that now when we think about Lombard, we can see that her intelligence and confidence and business acumen were all major elements of her career. Photographer John Engstead talked about how professional she was as a subject of photographs. She would work with him before shoots, setting everything up beforehand, discussing what she was going to wear, bringing clothes, which he says no other star would do. He talks about Dietrich, who would only ever do one type of photograph, and Lana Turner, who wouldn't prepare anything at all. Engstead said Carole prepared and planned and worked out everything that she was going to do beforehand. So she might have had this zany, dizzy image on screen. She wasn't dizzy in any other way. Ellen Tremper writes, Lombard's talents were perfectly balanced. She was able to play with verve, humour and intelligence a great variety of roles, but also to project absolute integrity. While other movie stars were identifiably themselves in film after film, Lombard, despite recognisable mannerisms, was something more. She was radiantly various, the real thing each time. That's a fantastic comment to have said about you. You know, we all know that that allegation that stars, that they always play themselves. Here, the real thing each time, radiantly various. That's a very exciting description. So Tremper talks about her sort of radiating an intelligent and energetic sincerity, but also, again, this sharp business acumen that she didn't keep to herself. She used it herself, but she also helped others. She was known to support others, people like Fred McMurray, with their careers, with their acting technique. She was very much an ensemble player. She believed that a film was only good if everyone was good in it. You know, she was never starry or sort of diva-like about things. Lombard found her most successful critical and commercial opportunities on loan-out deals from Paramount. And in her fascinating book, Independent Stardom, by Emily Carman, that I have learnt a tremendous amount from, Carman describes in great detail how Lombard was able to use these loan-outs to her own advantage, how she was very clever about them. In fact, Carman says that Lombard was the savviest of all the freelance stars post-contract, through astute wheeling and dealing, so especially post-Paramount, 1936 onwards. Again, that's another year where 1937 was so significant for Lombard. So her star image today is arguably not as strong in popular culture, I would say, as that of Joan Crawford, Betty Davis, or even Barbara Stanwyck. I'm happy to be argued with here, but I think her image in popular culture is not that great. But she is a different type of screen presence to those actresses. In The Power of Glamour, which is another wonderful book, look at those fabulous sketches on the front, all the stars that we're talking about. The Power of Glamour, Annette Tappert says, the truth about Carole Lombard, the truth is that Carole Lombard was way ahead of her time, a prototype of the kind of liberated American woman that didn't flower until long after her death. So there isn't the type of threat of high drama when Lombard enters a scene that you might get with Crawford or Davis. There is excitement, usually levity, beauty, and true sort of luminescence. She is electrifying in 20th century, hilariously wacky in My Man Godfrey, and darkly comic, as well as sort of utterly captivating in Nothing Sacred. She also shimmers and sparkles in her films in some incredible costumes, particularly in My Man Godfrey, and this is where I'd like to end. I'm incredibly grateful to Keith Lodwick, who's the curator at the Victoria and Albert Museum, who shared with me these images to show you tonight. This is a dress from My Man Godfrey, which was part of the Hollywood costume exhibition at the V&A in 2015. It really stood out as an exceptional dress. It was a highlight for me of that exhibition. I'm sure some of you went along. Keith told me that mounting this dress was one of the major challenges of the whole exhibition, and that they had to work out how to support an extremely valuable and heavy dress while maintaining the design of the show. They came up with this bespoke mount to support the dress securely without putting too much stress on the costume. It's made up of literally thousands of bugle beads. Virtually no other costumes from that period exist. Keith Lodwick told me it's a miracle that this costume survives. But Carole was there in Hollywood costume. For those of you who went, you'll remember that the costumes were topped with moving images of the stars on the screen. So Carole was there with her My Man Godfrey crazy centre parting and slightly wild hair, with this immaculate dress, beautifully exhibited. And I'm so pleased she was, because she was sort of beaming and glistening in this pantheon of Hollywood costume, where she should be. Because in my opinion, there is no star who is more of a Hollywood spirit than Carole Lombard? Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. That was amazing. Wonderful pictures. And I think it says something for just the richness of her career, that you've talked for 45 minutes, 50 minutes, but you've still cut off with like 3 years to go, because you've not been able to touch on some of her most, I mean, probably one of her absolutely most famous films, her last one, but also, you know, her drama career, which is, I think, much stronger than people give it credit for.
I agree. Also,
I think In Name Only, very good performance in that.
Can't possibly cover everything, all her life, her career in one talk. And so I think that's another talk.
Absolutely. No, I'm not criticising. I think it just says something for her career. One thing I would urge people to do, that we were just discussing this before we started. If anyone out there hasn't seen No Man of Her Own, and I suspect there's quite a lot of you, do Google it, because there's a very famous picture of her as a sexy librarian standing on steps getting a book from the shelf, clearly absolutely in a position that she knows that Gable will be looking up her skirt. And it's believe me, you get on a lot of librarian humour pages, that one. She's kind of our role model.
Okay, that makes me very happy to hear.
We've got quite a lot of questions, and please keep them coming. Before we start, I'll just say that we've got quite a lot of other film talks coming up. So if you tune in at exactly the same time next week, we have a talk on Ealing Studios, not the British part of Ealing Studios, the slightly less well-known Australian films they made in Australia. Dr. Stephen Morgan's presenting that. We also have talks coming up on David Niven, on James Mason. Slightly nearer to home in London, we've got talk coming up on Kenneth Williams. One on Fanny Craddock, for fans of 1950s TV cooks. And it's not just film talks. We've got ones coming up on beekeeping, on churches in Rome. We've got one with the rather tantalising title, Why Don't Men Wear Skirts? By a fashion historian. So please do have a look at our Eventbrite pages and see what you think. Okay. And also, just the other thing to say is this is being recorded, so if you do have to leave, get your tea, whatever, you can use the same link that you entered to watch it again, if you do have to leave early. Okay, and feel free to share the link. Okay, questions are coming in thick and fast. Okay, that's a nice one to start with from Jay. If you hadn't watched any of Carole's performances, what would be the best introduction?
Okay, I think 20th century, and I'll tell you why I think that. I was on the tip of my tongue to say Nothing Sacred, because it's just so beautiful and it feels so modern and very dark. But 20th century is the one where she really comes into her own. And what I particularly love about it, I mean, it is hilarious, but Barrymore is hilarious in it. But also she has this journey from, as I say, Mildred Plotka, the lingerie model, to Lily Garland, the star. And so in a way it kind of represents her shift from to a star as well, and it gives her a chance to play two very different roles, and she herself becomes a kind of monstrous diva as Lily Garland. So I think 20th century is the place to start.
We've got a couple of ones. We often get this question. Jay has asked, are there any modern day actors you think embody similar kind of spirit to Carole? And Deborah says, what do you make of the fact that Deborah Nancy Meyers has said that she saw Cameron Diaz as channeling Lombard in The Holiday? Is that's the one with Jude Law, isn't it?
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah, thank you. I can see that, because Cameron Diaz has always been known, I mean, obviously she's sort of essentially retired now, but she was always known for being, you know, the model who would also burp on TV, or that's why she's perfect for Princess Fiona in Shrek, because she's got like the sort of down with the boys, getting drunk and playing baseball, and the incredibly beautiful model from The Mask. So I can see actually that there is that combination of elements in Diaz. I think that's not a bad suggestion.
Julie, sorry, scrolling up. Yeah, so Julie Labalzo Wright, so if I pronounced your name wrong, Julie, says, what a fantastic talk. By the way, it's lovely people have compliments because the speaker is just speaking into a PowerPoint, and obviously they're not seeing people, so they're not even seeing me. So so compliments are very nice because they're the equivalent of clapping. Anyway, she wonders if you could say more about her time with Max Sennett, because there's so many great stars there with Max.
Yeah.
Worked in Sennett shorts. And as you say, they were training ground for Lombard. I think the only one I've seen is there's one just like School Sports Day, isn't there?
Yeah.
Where it shows her sports day, and the sidekick like became her secretary in real life.
Yeah, that's it. Filsey. Yeah. So Sennett was quite an interesting character, it seems. I mean, there's no doubt about it. That period was fantastic for Lombard. She also had an absolute blast. She really loved it. And she made a lot of great friends, particularly with Filsey, who was actually in the slide that I showed. She's a large woman, and Sennett saw them as a type of little and large, and he saw them as a great comedy combo. And in later years, Lombard employed Filsey as her kind of everything, like personal assistant, but she was an advisor, she was like a manager, they were incredibly close. I think it's really interesting because someone like Lombard, who was, as I said, always fated as a beauty, probably would never have gone into those Sennett comedies had she not had the accident, and nobody would hire her because of her mangled face. She said something like they all thought I was going to turn out to be Lon Chaney. And in fact, obviously it was a tiny little scar, but they were so hardcore about that kind of thing. So she went to Sennett. She thought it was a little bit below where she'd been before she'd had the accident, but she was advised it would be a good move. And it was the best thing she ever did, because Sennett didn't care about the scar because he cared more about people, how they looked in their bathing costumes from a distance, frankly. But also she was able to be really physical and sporty, and she was a very sporty person, very good tennis player, runner and dancer and everything. So it enabled her to become completely uninhibited. The one you're talking about, Nikki, is yes, she's running along with the School Sports Day, and she stops to kind of powder, or doesn't stop. She powders her nose as she keeps running, and yeah, they're great. There's quite a few of those on YouTube as well. So yeah, it was incredibly valuable time for her, and as I say, she may well not have gone there had it not been for the accident. So it's very interesting.
Because Sennett was quite keen on promoting like pairs of women, wasn't he? Like Emma Dodd and Patsy Kelly. So if her career had been slightly different, that's probably it would have ended up as making a series of shorts, which would have been fun, but obviously not what we wanted. Sydney asks, would you say Carole Lombard is unique in the way that the media presented her? She's quite a bold and multifaceted lady, which isn't always supported or applauded, especially in this time period. So is she different from the way, say?
I think you're right. I think so. I mean, they always say, don't they, that stars, that's what makes, stars are, a star is unique, that it's their particular bundle of characteristics that makes them a star. But what does seem to be, and I learned a lot about Lombard for the BFI season and for the BFI introduction events that I did last year. I didn't know anywhere near as much as I do now about Lombard then, even though I'm a lifelong Hollywood film fan and I've written a great deal about Hollywood stars. What I'd failed to appreciate, I think, was, there's so many kind of Cinderella stories in Hollywood, the rags to riches stories, the downtrodden, the victims of the studios. I've done a lot of work on people like Crawford saying, oh, we were just the property of MGM, we could have had MGM tattooed on our backsides and not complained, and all this type of thing. What I found is that Lombard was never like that. She would refuse to do things. She was very, Hollywood machinations ran through her veins. And yes, there were others, like Stanwyck was very independent, and Shearer obviously was quite independent because she married Thalberg. But someone like Betty Davis was actually what Emily Carmen, in that book Independent Stardom, Emily Carmen would call dependent stardom. She was actually very controlled by the studios. Lombard really she had this profane angel nickname. She had this ribald personality, larger than life. I think she was unique. And I think one of the things that happens always with these stars is that they can become known as half of a couple. So she's, you know, I think I probably first knew her as, you know, the woman that that Gable never recovered from. That broke Gable's heart, and he never recovered from her loss, and so she was the most beautiful, the most wonderful woman, and gone, but had no appreciation of just how much she'd done before she'd even got together with Gable. And so I think that yes, she was unique, definitely, and I think that there's a growth in work on her now that's beginning to show, as I quoted, that she was way before her time. And I think it's very interesting thinking again of stars of today. Many do go into setting up their own production companies, or some go into directing. I think that she would probably have gone down that path. As Hitchcock said, she could have been a director, she could have been a producer. I think she'd have been a fabulous producer, you know, so intelligent, so on top of everything, so canny. So I think she was, yeah, very unique. If you can be very unique, she was unique.
Okay, so there's lots of questions coming in. So I've slightly lost who this one was from. I think it might have been from Helen, but someone asked, do we know anything about what films she had in the pipeline when she died? Because I know at the point she died, To Be or Not to Be hadn't been released yet, had it?
No, but it was in post-production.
Yeah, was she already working on something else? I'm
not sure, actually. I don't know that.
Yeah.
I haven't read that. Bearing in mind, this was a time of her life. She had started working a bit less.
Yeah.
She married Gable. She really wanted to have a baby. Like she'd been working less. She'd been trying to have a baby. She couldn't get pregnant. She'd had miscarriages, that we think, and so she'd been working less. So she tried more of these dramatic roles, and some of these dramatic roles she'd really enjoyed and she'd done very well in, but they weren't going down that well with audiences. So she went back to do Mr. and Mrs. Smith, To Be and Not to Be. So I don't know where she was going actually at that point. It was an interesting point in her career.
And the fact that she was doing a war bonds tour and she leapt really quickly into that indicated that she probably would have been spending time on that sort of war work and the Hollywood Canteen. And she was ludicrously successful at that. She sold like $2 million worth on one day's worth of work. And so she was, everything she did, she was. Yeah. Lucy Bolton asks about the Hollywood reaction to her death, and who stepped into her roles, but we don't know whether she had anything lined up. I mean, I know I've looked at fan magazines and they're kind of devastated. I mean, it's almost sort of Princess Diana-like, because it must have been such an incredible shock.
Yeah, devastation. The industry was devastated, and also, so she became seen as sort of the first casualty of the war, the first Hollywood star casualty of the war. But yes, she was, because she was so popular. She was the most popular actress in Hollywood, so the industry was devastated, but the population, yes, as well. And of course, Gable was the very picture of being bereft. But Hollywood, the fan magazines are fantastic, aren't they, Nikki? I mean, they're very expensive. There are quite a few on eBay that are just too expensive to buy, frankly. The ones I've got, a couple of picture goers, and I was very pleased to get this one, the Life magazine. This is a very famous one, a major cover and major story, but they are quite expensive, so they're not
getting more popular, though some are online, so that's good. Do we know, somebody has asked, Rita has asked, are there any roles that she wanted but didn't get?
Scarlett O'Hara, along with everybody else, but she really wanted Scarlett. She really wanted to be in a film with Gable at that time, 1939, and she practiced it. She thought she'd be perfect for it. Thing is, nobody else did. But yeah, she really wanted to be Scarlett O'Hara. I think it's a very interesting question, that one roles that she might have wanted and didn't get, but also roles that she could have had and turned down. Imagine if she'd been in It Happened One Night with Gable. that could have been. I think she could have been fantastic.
That after about 1935, with the one exception of Gone with the Wind, there isn't many films that she would have been turned down for, if she wanted them.
Yeah.
I mean, there might have been films she would have been wrong for, but it's hard to imagine there would have been films she would have been turned down for.
Yeah.
Several people have asked about the relationship between Lucille Ball and Carole Lombard, because Lucille Ball was clearly spoke about her quite a lot.
Yes,
I don't know if they knew each other. Do we know?
It's ringing a bell. I'm not sure. I want to say I think they did, but I don't want to commit to that. I think I've read that recently, but I can't think where. So I'm not sure.
Was RKO, wasn't she? And I'm not sure Carole Lombard worked for RKO, but anyway.
I don't think so.
Marty has asked, can you say a bit more about how she was a good wheeler dealer regarding her contracts? My understanding is that Nothing Sacred didn't actually make money because she and Frederick March were paid so much.
Yeah.
But
yeah, in fact, I think they were quite relieved when she started to sort of move around, because Paramount couldn't really afford her anymore, because Myron Selznick was such a hardcore agent. She'd negotiated such a high salary and percentage. Well, I would recommend highly this book, Independent Stardom. It's meticulous in its research about the contracts, but also I think for Lombard it wasn't just financial, which I think is really important in relation to being a female star in Hollywood at that time. She also insisted upon a certain amount of working hours in a day, so that she wouldn't have to work too many hours. She insisted upon Travis Banton designing her costumes, things like that. She had what we might call riders in her contract they were integral. She had them worked into her contract. So she also, I think, had agreement that she would control or had approval of the font and size of font of her name and the titles, things like that. So she was very canny, and obviously she had a tough agent, but she had to work with that agent. Also, she was very good at PR, very good at her own publicity and at working on publicity. She saw it as part of the job, never resented it, was perfectly happy to. You may have seen photographs of her in the her publicist's office that have Lombard at work above it, where she said, oh, every star should work in their publicist's office for a week and see what the type of work is they do. And there's a whole series of photographs of her on the phone, making notes, sitting at a desk, things like that. She was really hot on doing her own publicity, but she saw that as a major part of her responsibility and her role as a star. So I think she just was very bright about all these elements, about making it work for her.
Danny has very helpfully posted the link to the Media History Project, which is where many fan magazines are available online. You. So it's in there. If people concentrate too hard on Lucy at the moment, if you look at the event afterwards, the chat remains there, so you can get the link, and it's very useful. One interesting question from Lynn, and I was kind of thinking about this. Lynn seems to remember that the term screwball comedy was invented for either My Man Godfrey or 20th Century, and it is interesting. It became the standard term very quickly. Yeah. Do you know anything about the origin?
It did. I can't think off the top of my head. It certainly became. It wasn't with. It happened one night. It certainly. I think it was after 20th Century. It became talked about.
20th Century is often meant to be the first one. But
yeah, exactly.
It's interesting.
Yeah, and what I thought was interesting in that article that I quoted from was. It suggested that Lombard herself was the screwball. So it's become known, I think, as the screwball genre. We call them screwball comedies. But in fact, the way in which she's talked about in the Life magazine article, which is 38, she is the queen of the screwball, and she is called the screwball. So I think it originates from her performance in 20th Century, but I'm not entirely sure.
Because it is a funny word. I mean, thinking about it, it is just a sort of made-up word.
Yeah.
Someone anonymous has asked an interesting question. Given that biopics are so popular, who do you think could play her, and why do you think she doesn't have the same iconography? iconographic starring Mr. Crawford, but who do you think should play her? Of course, somebody has already played her in a biopic, which I've not seen. You probably have.
Carole Lombard. That's on Amazon Prime. It's a bit irritating, but it's quite not a bad. It's not a bad depiction of her. Today, a biopic of her. She's got that energy, but also softness. I don't know. Maybe someone. Let me have a think. Scarlett Johansson is probably moved on from the old Hollywood films that she started out doing now. She's far more into kind of post-human cyborg type films. But I could have seen Scarlett Johansson playing her. You know, I don't know if you've seen the Black Dahlia, where she plays the kind of and also in the Coen Brothers film where she plays the kind of Hollywood golden age starlet. I think she's got that something, and she's got the right sort of physique for Lombard as well. I could see her playing Lombard. Why isn't she so okay? Well, first of all, obviously she died young, so a major part of the Davis and Crawford and Stanwyck legacy is how they aged. Baby Jane, Falcon Crest, Mommy Dearest. These works. I mean, Crawford in particular. You know, going through her sort of Mildred Pierce phase, Johnny Guitar phase, Trog. You know, they had long careers, and as they aged, they became almost caricatures of themselves. Not Stanwyck, but Betty Davis, Joan Crawford, in a way, not deliberately, but because of the films they were in and how they were treated. Something like Hush Hush, Sweet Charlotte for Davis, things like that. So Lombard didn't have the chance to solidify that image, and for also that image to get stuck and to ossify and not change and become as striking as the Crawford image, for example. I also think she's one of those actors, she's more mobile and excitable than Grace Kelly, but she has the similar colouring to Grace Kelly, and there is something that's less striking. So, for example, it's very difficult to do a caricature of Lombard or a caricature of Grace Kelly in the way that it's much easier to do one of, say, Marilyn Monroe or Audrey Hepburn or Joan Crawford. As soon as you've done the eyebrows and the eyes, and either Crawford the stark lips or Monroe the sleepy eyes, it's very easy to do a quick surface caricature of them. It's not that you can't. It's not easy to do that with Lombard. So I think she's a bit elusive. And also didn't have the length of time to get fixed.
And also, I guess there's no scandal about her. I mean,
not really.
People do like a scandal. So, Alison's just pointed out that the definition of screwball in dictionary, the first definition, apparently it's a sort of baseball pitch that spins and breaks.
I wondered if it was a sport. Yeah.
Direction to a curve. So I guess it's like what the British among us would call a googly in cricket. And then the other definition
I think it's a sports
term. And the other definition is a whimsical or eccentric or crazy person. So I guess it comes from screwy and stuff. Yeah. Carol B says she was named after Carole Lombard.
Oh, how wonderful! With the E, then I hope.
She has got the E on it. Yeah. So
my mum was as well. My mum's middle name is Carol with an E after Carole Lombard.
Yeah. I think we're probably going to have to wrap up now because we've run over time. So I'll finish with the last question. Do we know what Lubitsch, who directed To Be or Not to Be, her last film, thought of her? And do we know if she got to see any of it?
That's a good question. I don't. I mean, what a wonderful for people who haven't seen To Be or Not to Be. It's a fabulous film. It's also, again, I would say uniquely. Actually, here's another thing about her uniqueness. My students, film students, every now and then, I know there are some of you here tonight, Danny and others, who love Lombard. And I had a student on the MA a couple of years ago whose favourite film was To Be or Not to Be. And when he said that in the class, somebody else said, yes, mine too. These are people in their 20s. It's a fantastic satire on, it was quite outrageous at the time. Lubitsch, she was very keen to work with Lubitsch. I think they got on very well. I don't know if she'd seen any. I suspect she might have seen like rushes and things on a daily basis, but it wasn't complete when she died, so I don't know that. It's
No, in fact, I don't know if this is true, but I seem to remember reading somewhere that it was edited after her death, because there's at the end there's a bit where someone, the actors, they escape from war-torn Poland, and they're just on the point of escaping, and one of them says something like, "I can't believe that we're really safe," and somebody else says, "Don't worry, we're on a plane. Nothing can go wrong now."
Yeah.
And so it had to be cut. Yeah, which is absolutely understandable.
Yeah.
Well, on that rather sad note.
Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, I think we've established that if she isn't an established and lasting star, she certainly deserves to be one.
I think that's right.
We've also, I will tell you, there's probably about 30 requests in the chat for you to do another talk at some point. So we'll be having you back.
Lombard Part 2?
Lombard Part 2, or one of your other many other things that you're an expert in. But yes, we still we still have the last 3 or 4 years of Lombard's career to cover. So
exactly, yeah.
So thank you. I'll say good night to everybody. Good night, Lucy.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for coming. Bye.